Welcome to the Retrieving Catholicity podcast, where we think about life and ministry in light of the whole truth with the whole church for the whole world.
Welcome back to another episode of Retrieving Catholicity. I am your host, Mason Ballard, and I am joined once again by that man from Eastern Kentucky, Taylor Coles.
Man,
Taylor, how you doing, bro?
It's an honor to be a double guest, and yeah, it's great to be sitting here hundreds of miles away from you, but feels like we're in the same room.
Well, I'm telling you, man, the reviews are rolling in, and the people are raving about that first episode, so we had to do another one. We talked about our friendship in our first episode, so if you want to have a couple bros talking about their friendship, some podcasts that are newer like this one, not a lot of cachet built up on name, they just banter forever, and I'm like, who do you think you are, bro?
Nobody
no one
cares.
Yeah. So now, once you get to a certain level, the banter is kind of the point, you know?
Yeah.
You want to hear what your people say about all these things, but we're no one's people except our families, and so we'll keep things moving. One thing that has bound Taylor and I together is a shared, I would say, ministry philosophy or theological vision. We might not be identical. We might have differences, though not very many, frankly. I'm sure we do. But I do think that much of evangelicalism, Taylor, today is not torn asunder so much by doctrine, but how we hold those doctrines and how we I do think posture is a really big deal. And the way we go about things. And so we've talked for years about, we just did an episode on reading. We released that. We've obviously on a podcast about the Catholicity of the church. And so we're theologically inclined, but how do we not let that make us losers? How do we not let rich theology become a barrier to good, authentic, relational, true, warm, joyful living?
Well,
That
I
makes
think
sense?
it does. I think the first time I saw somebody put words to this frankly experience that I had and felt was Ray Ortland's book, The Gospel. I think it's just called The Gospel. It's in the little 9-mark series. It's a green book cover. And he talks about how you can have gospel doctrine and not have gospel community or gospel culture. That's the language he uses. And in particular, some streams of Reformed doctrine have had the ironic effect of producing arrogant, nitpicky, legalistic culture. It's weird. It's strange fruit to grow on that tree, because if any theological system should humble its adherents, you would think it would be that one. But nonetheless, it has produced a lot of exclusionary kind of culture. And so we both entered into ministry aware of that, recognizing that, and wanted to think a lot about how do we make sure that doesn't happen? How do we make sure the gospel doctrine here produces the gospel culture that it is supposed to produce?
Yeah. Why do you think it is that so much of more reformed circles are tempted to be marked by, if that's a way to articulate it, that pride and certainty about everything?
Well, I actually think it's I think it's kind of simple once you think about it for a while, is they actually don't believe what they're saying. Their theological belief is I'm justified by faith. Their functional belief is I'm justified by my doctrine. So it's not that I'm justified by faith in what Christ did on the cross. It's I'm justified by my knowledge of the precise inner workings of how Jesus saved me on the cross.
Yeah.
Excludes people who disagree with that, which all of a sudden now we're into Galatian heresy territory.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that this is maybe too inside baseball, but I have just people that I connect with and look up to or esteem. They're always convictional, but they're not marked by their own certainty about everything. That I'm averse to guys who just don't have opinions on anything and just love to throw grenades at people, or scoffers. I think it's really easy to be a scoffer in these days. Just make fun of what people believe that are, it's just because that's easy, low hanging fruit. So I want to believe things, man. I've said this before on the podcast. I don't know if I've told you this or not, but that passage, I think Paul tells Timothy, beware of those who are always pondering but never arriving.
Yeah.
Be aware of those who are always learning but never arrive at knowledge of the truth. So I'm very much, let's be convictional. Let's believe things. Let's believe and give our lives to those things and build our lives around those convictions. But at the same time, there are some people who seem utterly incapable of self-reflection or utterly incapable of self-correction or utterly incapable of saying hey, I'm pretty convicted that this is true, but I am very aware of my own fallibility and my own ability to be wrong. And so I think there's so much of, and I heard someone talk about this recently, that we live in, confessionalism is on the rise in our age. And I think that's a good thing. So I don't want to be like, okay, where's it going with this? I think that's more of a good thing than a bad thing. But what I would hate to see is confessionalism fall back to the wayside because we begin to esteem it as like, here's all the answers and like, this is it. Like there's no engagement or no deeper contemplation. So I guess I would just say that if your system is very rigid, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just be aware of your own fallibility and holding that rigidity. Yeah, and it does feel like once we think we're certain about something, that's going to impact the way we hold it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say we're convictional, so I don't want to get too off the wood. But does that make sense? Am I getting at something valid, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. It gets me into like theological triage territory, the coin termed, I think, by Al Mohler, and Gavin Ortland has written a book on it. To put it in real flesh and bones terms, I remember a few years ago I was hanging out with a friend who had totally deconstructed his evangelical upbringing, was trying to figure out what he believed. He said to me, everything growing up was so black and white, and now I'm finding a lot of freedom in living in the gray area, and kind of asked me to reflect on it. What do you think? And the thing that came to me was, I think that there are a few things that are really, really black and white that we need to hold on to like they're black and white so that we don't get lost in all the other gray. And as you said, that's not to say that we shouldn't have convictions about what the Bible teaches about X, Y, or Z secondary or tertiary doctrines. It means that we hold on for dear life to the things we're certain about. The Trinity, the one person and two natures of Christ, his death for sinners and for our salvation, that salvation is of God and God's grace and these sorts of things. These are the things we hold on to for dear life. And I had a conversation this morning with two elder candidates in our church about the theological diversity that exists in our congregation. And we were reflecting on like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And it's like, well, it depends on how far it goes. I don't want to have theological diversity on the doctrine of the Trinity or on the authority of Scripture or something like this. If there is diversity on eschatological views, end times views, even to some degree on the sacraments and things like this, that actually is a good thing that tells me that the tenor of our preaching and our teaching, that we're keeping the main things. And when we need to address those things, when the text leads us to, in a new membership class or whatever, we'll say, hey, this is what we teach on this here. But it doesn't become a church that's identified with, oh, that church is the pre-trib rapture church, or that church is the, conservative Republican church or whatever.
Yeah, that's good. I did an episode on theological triage, I think, in the first season. And there are some people who talk about secondary issues as if they're not very important. And if you're going to be theologically robust, which is kind of the thrust of this episode, how do we have rich theology and warm community? The rich theology side of that means that the secondary issues are really important. And so they're often going to be church-defining issues, right? So, not church-defining, but like local church-defining. So in other words, why we're in this church and not that church. And I think I used to be, maybe 5-6 years ago, a much more laissez-faire to say, hey, I don't really care. I care, but I don't want to be divisive over this. So whatever you think's okay. But now I'm much more aspirational to say, this is what we're going to teach and practice because we're convicted of it. And so this is where we're going, and we're going this way because we're convinced that the Bible teaches these things. Mm-hmm. We're also convinced that there are other Christians who don't esteem them as significantly as we do. And so they might not think about them the same way, or they may esteem them as significantly, but they think about them differently. And so they're going to practice them over here. If this is such a big deal to you that you need to practice it that way, you can go over there. But rich theology, I think, is we are thoughtful about all these things and then strive to hold them with appropriate firmness. Right?
Mason, what do you, let me ask you a question about just pastoral practicalities. I find that we have a lot of Reformed Paedo-Baptists in our church who will attend regularly for long periods of time and won't join. And I struggle with is my unwillingness to be as direct as that a fear of man thing? And I just need to encourage them, hey, join the church or go to a different church. Or how do you handle those types of situations when there's a disagreement of the extent that they cannot join the church or join in good conscience but want to continue attending? How do you handle that as a pastor?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll give you the quick answer, and then I'll give you a little bit longer. The quick answer would be, depending on that would come up in a membership class. So week 2 is where we usually talk about the doctrines related to that. And then we have an interview after the class where we then kind of talk about everything we talked about in the class and are there any questions. And so I would kind of have the first word in the conversation because I've got the microphone in the class, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would say, this is our theology of the church. This is what the church is. And then our sacramentology flows from that ecclesiology, right? Because we believe the church is a gathering of believers. That's a core Baptist distinctive. then we agree with the Church Catholic that baptism is a rite of entry into the church, but that's going to flow from our ecclesiology. And so that's what we believe, and that's what we will practice. And so by saying that's what we will practice, it then rules out the ability for them to practice that in their own family. So then in the interview portion, this is where we can have the dialogue about it. If the family is aware that this is what we practice, and it's like we really do believe it, if you join the church, you are saying, I at least understand that, and I will not do anything contrary. I will not serve people contrary to that, as in the covenant. Then I would be okay with them joining. But if it's a big enough deal to somebody that they wouldn't be able to say, I'm a member here and I'm going to go baptize my kid over at this Anglican church or Presbyterian church in town, right? Yeah. So it's one of those things where this is what we believe, this is what we're going to practice. And so if that includes you, you know what I mean? And are they willing to say, okay, I love the expositional preaching of this church, I love the liturgy of this church, I love the whatever about this church. So to me, those things are more important. So I'm going to anchor my family here, despite this stated disagreement. I would have, now some Baptists would disagree with me, and I might catch some heat for that, but I would have a category for saying they can be members. But we are going to practice, this particular way. They usually self-select at that point.
Yeah. I sometimes struggle with just in weighting the two, right? Gospel doctrine and gospel culture. In my desire to lift up gospel culture, do I get scared to be as direct with the doctrine? And in my doctrine, can I sometimes push away that it's the balancing act, and I guess balancing act is the wrong word, because you're not trying to have 50-50 of each. We believe that if there is true gospel doctrine, it will create gospel culture. But in practice, it can be challenging.
Yeah, let's talk about that now. Rich theology, warm community. So we've had a discussion about really some good case studies. And if you're thinking really thoughtfully about these things, and if they really matter to you, if they're things that you want to really think thoughtfully about, we want to be thoughtful about who's in church leadership. We want to be thoughtful about what we do in the worship service. We want to be thoughtful about who joins. We want to be we want our sermons to be rich in doctrinal content, theologically robust. But good preaching aims at what? The heart. Right? That we want to, we're not talking to thinking things. We're talking to loving and thinking people, right? So I think as we think about practicing rich theology and warm community, if you're going to be committed to high commitment, let's just say high commitment church broadly. I have a theory. Harsh church, mean church helped lead to the rise of casual church. And one of the problems with casual church is fundamentally unserious about theological topics, and it's fundamentally unserious about itself because it's overreacting to casual church or to harsh church. So harsh church led in some broad category to casual church, and now casual church has kind of run its course. So people in casual church have either stagnated where they are, or they are leaving casual church and they don't want to go back to harsh church, right? So when you're pastoring a bunch of people who they didn't come from harsh church, they came from casual church, we're actually raising commitment levels to what they've considered, because church to them has always been a commodity and a respite, at least from the church that split over the music, or the church that fought over the style, or whatever. And so I think one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to say, hey, church is a big deal. These things are really important. Let's raise the bar. The Lord's Day is a thing, we should gather every Sunday with the people of God. We should we should do these. So if you're going to have a thoughtful and high commitment church, I'm making the case here that you have to have a high grace church, or you're going to kill people. You're going to become a harsh church. You're going to burn out. If you're going to be marked by aspirations of knowledge and commitment, then you have to be marked by aspirations of love and grace, because we are all we need that. Does that make sense? We have to say we're going to be committed to thinking deeply and committing strongly. Yeah. Then if you do that without saying we're going to forgive quickly, we're going to repent quickly, we're going to love warmly, we're going to you've set yourself up for failure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that's fundamentally, that is how it does work, right? I think one great analogy of this, or illustration, is from this song by this band that is not a particularly good, Dispatch. The song's called The General. I don't know if you remember the song.
I don't.
It tells a story about this old general who's led his men into many, many battles, and he's laid down his life for them and fought for them and led them and served them. And they come up on this one battle, and he comes back to him and he calls them and he says, men, we don't have a chance at winning this battle. Go home. Take a shower, shine your shoes. You got no time to lose. Get home. Go be with your mothers, be with your wives. we have no business fighting this battle. And he gives them this speech, but what he finds is one by one, they stand up and they're there and they say,
Wow.
we're going into this battle with you. We're not going anywhere. Because
Yeah.
they've seen that this guy has put his life on the line for them over and over and over again. In the same way, we love because he first loved us. It's the gospel that creates a response of love, which entails obedience. Jesus says, if you love me, you will obey my commands. Not, obey me so that I will love you. But because I have loved you, you respond in love, and that love takes the form of obedience.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that when you extrapolate that into a community or from an individual level to a social level, we don't strive to be a healthy church so that we can be a perfect church. I've talked about this, but because that's good. Like Christ has laid down his life for his people. His word has a design for how his church is to function and operate. And alignment with that design is not like a rubric or a scorecard for our own performance sake. It is leaning into God's design for his gathered people. And that design is for our good.
Which we can trust because he laid down his life. Like he proved to us that he's for our good. Yeah.
Exactly. That God is after our good, the good of his people. He loves his people more than we do. He is more committed to his people than we are. He's more committed to us than we are. And this all of this, I think, flows from a thick appropriation of the gospel into our individual and communal lives. And that it might sound like, oh, these are just a couple of old heads from the gospel-centered movement, but it really is true. We are old heads in the gospel and such things.
Amen.
But I really do think it's true that the good news of Jesus changes everything. The good news of Jesus changes the way we do church. And we're spending a lifetime learning what that looks like, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, just in the last episode where we talked about books, it talked about the expulsive power of a new affection, and that is really what we're after in the gospel, right? Is like we can't just get up and tell people stop being worldly or come to church more. We're holding in front of them a vision of the beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
That's right. Yeah.
Over and over and over and over again, and praying, Spirit, give them eyes to see and give them ears to hear that this is more beautiful, so that they'll go sell everything they have, buy the field with the buried treasure in it, in a move that looks crazy to people, and yet is the most satisfying, fulfilling thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. The last thing we'll talk about is we've both said in some form or fashion that Rich Theology, Warm Community is like a vision statement for our churches.
Yeah.
We've kind of been tinkering with ours I tell church planters this, and you're not, I don't know if you're still a church planter, I guess. If I'm still a church planter, you're sure as heck still a church planter. Resurrection is a liturgical Baptist church committed to rich theology, joyful living, and gospel mission. And I think you have to revisit those things because the vision statement is both aspirational and reflective. In other words, it tells you who you want to be, and it tells you what you actually are. And so there's a time to look back and say, okay, what by God's grace are we? And then who by God's grace might we become? And so that's kind of a phrase I've landed on. And again, I don't use vision statements to differentiate from everyone else. I've done a lot of talking about that, the Catholicity of the church, folks. But we do want to articulate what God is doing amidst our unique fellowships, our unique congregations. And so I think it's right to articulate that. So for us, I put those terms, rich theology, and I use theology because of knowledge of God, how the knowledge of God impacts a rich theology and joyful living, that I want to put those things together. That's another way of articulating rich theology and warm community. Why is that something that you think is significant enough to lead with when articulating who we are?
Well, I mean, I think it's both timeless and timely. It's timeless in the sense that we see it. I mean, it's the book of Galatians, right? It's like legalism has crept into their doctrine, and it's produced a horrible culture of division, racism, like all kinds of issues. And the corrective is the gospel. And in our day, I think in particular, the two challenges that need to be met are we have people who the last 10 years have been blown every which direction by every wind and wave of doctrine and false teaching, and who believe crazy stuff now. People who we were doing ministry with 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, that's right.
We need strong doctrine to hold us and to keep us from losing our minds.
That's right.
When the contrary winds blow. And people are lonelier, more isolated, more anxious than ever. The loneliness epidemic is a thing, and people need a community around them to live with, to care for them, to bear their burdens, to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice.
Yep.
That is non-judgmental, and where you don't necessarily have to have all the doctrine just right in order to benefit from that.
That's huge. That is huge.
So, I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do. And it's not a quick church growth strategy.
No.
We could grow our churches much faster by leaning into one of those things or the other.
That's right. That's how you build a platform.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore how you grow a church quickly.
Yeah. But it's also the fact that leaning into that to grow a church quickly is also growing a church that will turn on you when you're not throwing them enough red meat anymore.
Yeah, you're growing. It's like the mega church theory, right? What's it called? Where you have one thing and you focus. We're the church for X.
Yeah, the homogeneous unit.
Yeah, the homogeneous unit. That's right. And so we want to say, hey, we are trying to live out the good news of Jesus for the sake of everybody.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult process, but we want to be here. Yeah, we want to give you a rich ability to think about all things in light of the Word of God, and we want to be loving and patient with you as we do that together. And I think that one temptation for our folks as churches is that I want to have a high commitment, like a high membership bar, but I look at churches maybe that are less thoughtful. They have a wider front door, and I say, like, if some of that's a branding and inevitable, okay, I'm not going to change to do that. But I do want to make sure people are aware that, like, you can come here, period.
Yeah.
You can show up for we want anyone and everyone to show up and think about these things, even if you don't stick around. So
it's good.
I think that's a big thing, that we really do love you, you know, and we can assume that to the point that we don't actually do that or teach that. So
yeah, but if it's going and people show up, they'll experience it. They'll pick up on it quickly.
That's
the
right.
Warmth and
they will. What's Paul say? The aroma of the living to those who are alive and to dead. Like, there are people who hate it and leave.
Yeah.
And who say, wait a minute, there's something here. Like, there's something real here. And in our age, we'll close with this thought. I think we are ministers of reality. I think gospel ministers are ministers of reality. I'm preaching through 1 John right now, and these themes of light at a very basic level are revelatory. Light reveals. Light shows us what's true. In the same way that John wants the early Christians to see what is real, to see what is true, that is a function of gospel preaching today, is to help people see what is real. In a world that says you can be anything, a man can be a woman, this can be you can be anything, you can construct whatever. There are all these realities and augmented realities and virtual realities and all these things. Like, what is real, what is true, what is good, what is beautiful? We have the answer in the Bible. The good news of Jesus gives us the ability to know what is true, good, and beautiful. And we want to help everyone think about everything in light of this thing that changes everything. And so I think that requires the task requires rich theology. Yeah. We don't get to, we have to give people an anthropology. You didn't have to give a guy in Nashville an anthropology 60 years ago. Yeah. He inherited a decent one. Now, he still needed corrected. You know, we had anthropological problems when black people weren't allowed to drink from the same water fountains as white people. Yeah. That's an anthropological problem. So I get a little bit fired up. People are like, we have had tests on who is a human? What does it mean to be a human? How do we honor humans? But those morph, those change over time. And so we need to be willing to provide in both our evangelism and both our conversation, like thick doctrine. But man, like, the way of Jesus is not the way of untruth. It's not performative anger, as some seem to think. Jesus is only interested in flipping tables just arbitrarily. Yeah. But the way of Jesus is sustained love and holiness in devotion to the Father. And so I think that, and real joy. Like, we can have, even thoughtful, moody guys like us can have real joy because of Jesus. And I think that real joy, some of our team would know, like, I've been on such a big positivity kick. Not positivity for positivity's sake or because I am a rah-rah guy now. I'm still depressed by my sports teams, right? But people follow people with a positive, joyful vision, period. Yeah. And we want to be compelling in that way because the gospel demands it. Yeah, we ought to be the happiest and holiest people on the planet, and those two things should mutually inform one another. That's right. Hey, Taylor, thank you so much for coming back, man. Thanks, brother. Where can our people find you? Maybe your church or your Substack, anything like that? Yeah, King's Cross Church is the name of our church, and I'm writing at East and Eden on Substack. All right, man. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching this. Thank you for listening. I hope you will tell a friend. I hope you'll share it, and I hope that it will be helpful for you as you think about how can we be a people who are committed to rich doctrine, rich theology, and warm, joyful community, right? So like, subscribe, rate, review, etc., etc., etc. Thank you for joining us. Grace and peace be with you. See you later.